Her son handed her a vitamin pack an hour after telling his wife, "It's almost time to cash out." Margaret Sloan, retired science teacher and widow, smiled and quietly froze the pill for testing. They thought she was slipping, but she was building a legal K-Swan dosage at a time. By week's end, she revoked cohabitation rights and locked down the estate. He planned to bury her quietly. The courts buried his claim instead. And when he came looking for her signature, she was gone and every asset had gone with her. Before we begin, may I ask where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. He handed her the vitamin pack with a smile. Polite, controlled. The kind people practice in mirrors when they're trying to convince someone they still care. "Morning, Mom," David said, setting the foil pouch next to her tea. "Just a little blend to keep the brain firing." Margaret looked up from her crossword, eyes steady beneath her silver-streaked bangs. She didn't reach for the packet. Not yet. "Thank you," she said simply. The sun hadn't broken through yet. Another wet spring morning in Oregon, the kind where the damp just hangs in your bones. Outside, wind combed through the fir trees like fingers. Inside, everything was too still. The in-law suite, with its gleaming laminate floors and overly plush armchair, felt like a hotel with no checkout time. The packet lay between her and her toast, pale green, minimalistic, Clarity Plus Senior Wellness Complex. No brand name, no ingredients list, just a cheerful font and a promise. An hour earlier, while boiling water for tea, Margaret had passed the kitchen on her way back from the linen closet. David's iPad was lit on the counter, FaceTime open, volume low. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but when you're 74 and recovering from a fractured pelvis, you move quietly without meaning to. "She's still taking them, right?" Lena's voice sleek and impatient. "David. Yeah. Every morning, it's almost time to cash out." Margaret stood frozen by the stove, hands still damp from washing. Her heart didn't race. Her fingers didn't tremble. She just listened. Lena said something else, muffled. David chuckled. The kind of laugh that used to belong to the boy she raised, except this one felt colder, grown in the shadow of something she'd ignored for too long. Now, sitting alone with the vitamins, she stared through the window at the drizzle bleeding down the glass. She slid the packet into the drawer next to her knitting needles and picked up her pen. David passed the suite again around 11, humming some melody that didn't belong to him. He didn't pause, didn't ask if she'd taken them. When Lena came down to refill her water bottle, she flashed a quick, metallic smile. "How's the crossword today? You still killing it?" "Still killing it," Margaret said, marking a 5-letter clue for regret. She noticed the way Lena's eyes flicked toward the nightstand, where the vitamin pack was no longer visible. "Need anything?" Lena asked. "No, thank you." Lena left without waiting for more. Margaret rose slowly, favoring her right leg, and walked to the desk she kept under the window. She opened her notebook. Not the crossword, the other one. The one with the leather cover Lyle had given her on their 40th anniversary. Inside, she began a new entry. The 7th of April. A.M. dose. Packet appearance unchanged. Same delivery tone. Overheard conversation confirms suspicion planned transition. Premature. She closed the notebook gently. Later that day, during dinner, David made a show of plating chicken breast and wild rice. "You've got to keep your protein up," he said, sliding a water glass toward her like he was placing a bet on a roulette table. He was talking more than usual, laughing harder at his own jokes. Lena, on the other hand, seemed uninterested, scrolling silently through her phone. Neither of them mentioned the pills again. Margaret watched them without reacting, the same way she used to watch her students try to cheat during final exams. She smiled once, deliberately, when David said something about spring cruises. "You ever think about taking one, Mom?" he asked. "Maybe," she said, "if things clear up." That night, after they went upstairs and the hallway lights clicked off, she stood quietly in the kitchen, letting the silence wrap around her like fog. She opened the drawer, took out the packet. Then she turned and walked back to her desk without a word. Margaret leaned over the microscope in the dim light of her suite, the air thick with rain and tension. The crushed capsule sat neatly on the glass, the powder flattened with the dull edge of her tweezers. It shimmered faintly under the lens, more crystalline than herbal, more synthetic than any over-the-counter blend had a right to be. She adjusted the magnification, her breath shallow. The irregular shape shards, not flakes, got the backlight like salt under moonlight. This wasn't ginkgo or turmeric. It didn't match anything she'd seen during her years in the classroom, or during late nights with the school's rudimentary lab equipment. Her fingers curled around the pen on her desk. She jotted down. Unnatural particulates, possible synthetic stimulant, not consistent with label. The smell of the opened capsule still hung in the air. Bitter. Chemical. A faint sting in her nostrils. She sealed the rest of the crushed sample in a plastic coin envelope and labeled it carefully. The 7th of April. A.M. dose. The next morning, while David and Lena were out for groceries, so they claimed, Margaret pulled out her old Rolodex. Most of the names were obsolete, dead, moved. But near the back, under R, she found the one that still mattered. Dr. Randall Green, OSU Chemistry Department. It had been 20 years since she'd spoken to Randall, but when she called, his voice hadn't changed. Gruff, curious. Margaret Sloan? My God, I thought you'd moved to Arizona or something. I stayed put, she said. Listen, I need a favor. Quiet and off the record. You still have access to a mass spectrometer? His voice dropped. Depends on what you need. I have a sample. I'm not saying what it is yet, but I think it's liver toxic. There was a beat. Then, you still drive? I still think for myself. By late afternoon, she'd slipped the envelope into a padded mailer. No return address, just a note that read, "Run it clean. No traces." She mailed it from the UPS store 2 towns over. Wore sunglasses. Paid cash. Back home, the rain hadn't let up. It smeared the kitchen windows in gray streaks. The house felt sealed shut, too warm, like it was trying to incubate something. Margaret moved through the rooms quietly. She waited until David stepped out to take a call, and Lena wandered upstairs with her Bluetooth headset. Then she went to the locked drawer in the hallway desk and retrieved a folderone she hadn't looked at in 5 years. Inside, the deed to the house, tax papers, a dog-eared letter from the bank with both her and David's names circled. She scanned down the page. Joint ownership with survivorship clause. Her name was still there, clear as ever, which meant David couldn't sell without her, couldn't cash out without more than just a signature. She set the papers aside and reached for her phone. It rang twice. Greer Langston, came the voice on the other end, efficient and always calm. Greer, it's Margaret Sloan. Well, that's a name I haven't heard in a decade. I need a consultation. Quiet. Off the books. David? Yes. Another pause. What's happening? Margaret stared at the vitamin pack still sitting untouched on her tray. If someone's betting on my expiration date, I'd like to fold their hand before they play it. Greer didn't ask questions. Send me what you have. I'll handle it quietly. No paper trail. We'll talk tomorrow. That night, Margaret waited until the house was dark. The faint scent of sautéed garlic still lingered in the kitchen, but it was overpowered by the plastic and metal tang of silence. She crouched beneath the kitchen island and reached up behind the spice rack. Her fingers felt the smooth edge of the small black recorder. She clicked it on and slid it into place behind a false panel, something David himself had installed during a brief renovation phase. It was invisible. She stood slowly, steadied herself against the marble counter. Behind her, a floorboard creaked. They buttered her toast and discussed cruise packages. She sipped tea and pressed record. Margaret sat at the end of the long quartz island, wrapped in a pale blue cardigan, her expression pleasant, almost docile. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon toast and citrus floor cleaner, too bright, too staged. She held her teacup just beneath her nose, letting the steam rise while her thumb flicked the recorder hidden inside the lining of her sweater. Lena was performing, her hair perfectly blown out, voice honeyed. She set a stack of glossy travel brochures on the counter, fanned them like a magician with a new trick. "Look at this one, Margaret," she said, tapping a page showing a white ship slicing through turquoise water. 15-day coastal cruise, gourmet dining, daily excursion. Doesn't it look peaceful? Margaret leaned in, adjusted her reading glasses. Lovely. I haven't been near the ocean in years. Lena beamed like she'd just won something. David leaned against the sink, arms crossed, sipping coffee with the casual charm of a man playing the long game. Maybe next year, he said, winking. If things clear up. He let the words dangle, like the aftertaste of a joke no one really wanted to laugh at. Margaret met his eyes for a heartbeat and smiled as if she hadn't noticed anything at all. She tore a piece of toast and nibbled politely. The butter was warm, soft, a little too salty. Lena flipped to another page. There's also a train ride through Napa, wine tastings, gardens, a bit gentler on the knees. How thoughtful, Margaret said, her voice light as air. Though my knees are perfectly functional. Lena froze for a moment, just a blink, and then laughed. Of course, just options, you know. Margaret took a slow breath, glanced toward the teapot. A second cup was already waiting for her, steam curling gently toward the overhead lights. She hadn't poured that one. She waited. David reached for a small container on the far counter. A white ceramic one, unmarked. Need a little sugar? He asked casually. No, thank you, Margaret said. It dulls the flavor. But he didn't add sugar to his own. Instead, while Lena shifted the brochures again, he opened the container and tilted it slightly over Margaret's teacup. His hand moved smoothly, practiced, like this wasn't the first time. A quick pinch, a stir. Margaret watched from the corner of her eye, her gaze fixed on a travel photo of Greece. She exhaled softly and smiled. Tell me more about that one, she said, pointing with her pinky. The islands look so untouched. They've got these cliffside hotels, Lena said, seizing the distraction. Private plunge pools, and a helicopter option. David thought you'd love that. Adventurous of him, Margaret murmured, lifting the teacup. She held it delicately, blew on it, then took a theatrical sip, lips barely touching the rim. She let it linger just long enough to be convincing. Then she set it down slowly. Delicious. What's the blend? Chamomile, I think, Lena said, already moving on. Good for calming the nerves. Is that so? Margaret looked down into the pale gold liquid. It smelled wrong, slightly metallic under the herbal scent. Just a hint, but sharp enough for someone who knew how chemicals behaved. The warmth from the tea traced the rim of the cup, a faint shimmer of condensation ghosting her fingertips. Could I have a travel mug for the rest? She asked lightly. No sense wasting such a fine brew. David blinked. Sure. Of course. He reached for the cabinet, but Margaret waved him off. No, I've got it. Let me do something for myself. She poured the tea into a thermos from the back shelf, one she hadn't used since moving in. It clicked shut with a satisfying finality. She carried it back to her suite and set it carefully on her desk. She opened her laptop, the one she hadn't touched since retirement, and created a new spreadsheet. The 8th of April, 9:06 a.m., yellow cup, suspect alteration observed, no consumption. Sample stored. She labeled the thermos with a sticker from an old-school supply drawer and slid it into the mini-fridge behind the chair. Then she reached for the next empty column. They thought she was alone, but Tess watched more than birds. It was a Monday morning, brisk and dripping from last night's rain, when Margaret stepped out to water the porch violets more ritual than necessity. Her cardigan hugged tight at the collar, the air wet with pine and chimney smoke. From across the fence, Tess Rutherford raised a hand in greeting. Garden gloves muddy, binoculars swinging from her neck. Out early, Tess said, wiping her palms on her jeans. Trying to keep them alive, Margaret replied, nodding to the half-wilted blooms. Tess tilted her head. I saw your daughter-in-law pouring something into your mug yesterday morning. Real secretive. Thought she was sneaking booze at first. Margaret paused, just long enough to register, then gave a light chuckle. Probably oat milk. She's a health nut. Tess squinted toward the house. Didn't look like oat milk. Looked like a capsule, actually. You know, like crushed vitamins or something. Weird angle. Margaret tucked the watering can against her hip. She's very proactive about supplements. Thinks they'll keep me young. Tess pulled off her gloves. Doesn't seem like she wants you young. Or around, really. Margaret didn't answer. Instead, she asked carefully, do they act different when I'm not here? Tess let out a soft breath, like she'd been waiting to be asked. Yeah, they do. Margaret met her eyes. Don't get me wrong, Tess said, stepping closer. They're polite, but it's all tight smiles, always talking like they're managing something. You know that tone? Like when someone's organizing a fundraiser no one wants to attend. Margaret gave a slight nod. And when you're home? Tess added. They switch, like you're a project they're finishing up. That's what it feels like from here, like you're phase 3 of some remodel. The watering can felt heavier in Margaret's hand than it had 10 minutes ago. She placed it gently on the porch rail. You're very observant. I live alone. Gives you time to notice things. Margaret offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Thank you, Tess. Tess looked like she might say more, but then her phone buzzed, and she stepped away with an apologetic wave. Back inside, the house smelled like bleach, and Lemon Lena had done her week. Lee, deep clean, scrubbing everything but her own conscience. Margaret slipped into the in-law suite, peeled off her wet shoes, and reached for her phone. A voicemail blinked. She hit play. Margaret, it's Greer Langston. I've reviewed your husband's will, and let's just say there's a clause you'll want to hear. Not over the phone. Call me when you can. Discreetly. Margaret stood motionless, the message echoing in the quiet room. Lyle had never trusted easily. He was a man who wrote his passwords on paper, triple witnessed documents, and filed everything in fireproof boxes. Whatever he'd written into the estate, it wasn't careless. She dialed Greer's direct line and spoke in a low voice. I need to see you. Somewhere private. Done, Greer said. I'll text a location. Margaret hung up, heart steady, mind racing. She closed the spreadsheet she'd kept open since yesterday, logged the tea entry, and made a mental note to prep a clean envelope for her next sample. The kitchen recorder was running. Her notebook was locked in the bottom drawer. The plan, quiet and deliberate, was taking shape. At dusk, she walked to the front of the house to grab the mail, eyes trailing the sloping drive. The clouds stitched low across the hills. The wind had picked up. Somewhere, a dog barked. She turned the knob to her bedroom and froze. The drawer beneath her dresser was open, half pulled. Lena stood with her back to the door, her hand deep inside Margaret's sweater pile, rifling. He thought she was worth more gone. She was worth more awake. Margaret stood perfectly still in the doorway, watching Lena dig through her drawers like she was searching for something she didn't even know how to recognize. Lena didn't turn around. Looking for a sweater? Margaret asked softly, her voice so calm it almost sounded amused. Lena jerked upright, face tightening, hand still half buried in a stack of folded cardigans. Oh, hi. I was just straightening up. In the back of my dresser? Margaret took one slow step into the room. I thought I saw a receipt sticking out. Didn't want you to lose anything important. Margaret nodded once. How thoughtful. She didn't ask what Lena had found. She didn't ask what she'd taken. She simply watched her leave, then closed the door behind her. She locked it this time. The next morning, Margaret met Greer at a small coffee shop tucked behind a used bookstore in Old Towna Place with no Wi-Fi, no digital receipts, and a cashier who still used a handwritten punch card for regulars. Greer was already there, her trench coat damp from the drizzle, 2 cups of black coffee waiting. Margaret slid into the booth across from her. Greer didn't bother with pleasantries. Let's talk about the clause. Margaret took a sip. Go ahead. Greer pulled a folded copy of the will from her leather brief. Her nails were short, clean, trimmed with purpose. She tapped the middle of page 3. Your husband was no fool. The cohabitation clause was added in 2016. Quietly. I remember drafting it myself. Margaret leaned in. If you die while residing under David's roof, specifically in a property co-owned with him, he inherits everything. Immediately. No probate, no challenge. But, she paused, watched Margaret's expression. If you voluntarily revoke cohabitation, legally sever residence, and withdraw consent to shared occupancy, David gets nothing. Margaret blinked once. Nothing? Not a penny. The coffee had gone cold in her hands, but she didn't care. And Lena? She's nowhere on the paperwork. If David's cut off, so is she. Margaret stared out the window at the rain running down the pane in broken rivulets. Lyle knew, she said finally. Greer nodded. I think he saw this coming. The clause, etched in legalese, was simple in intent and brutal in consequence. As long as Margaret remained under David's roof, alive or dead, she was the gateway, the signature, the seal. But if she removed herself on, her termshiz fortune dissolved into dust. This is your leverage, Greer said, folding the will again. Quietly notarize the revocation. We'll backdate the notice, file it with the private office. No one else needs to know. Margaret nodded slowly. I'll need a witness. Someone you trust. I have one in mind. That afternoon, Tess came over with a basket of fresh rosemary and a Tupperware of lemon bars. Margaret offered tea, declined the bars, and quietly explained what she needed. Tess listened, still as stone, then said, "You want me to witness you walking away from your own house? I want to witness myself staying alive." Tess reached out and squeezed her hand once. "Tell me where to sign." They met Greer again that evening, this time in Margaret's sunroom, with the curtains drawn and the heat turned up just enough to keep the chill away. The papers were signed, the revocation dated, witnessed, sealed. By the time David and Lena returned from their grocery run, Margaret was in bed, lights off, one arm draped over, the comforter like she'd been sleeping for hours. She heard them come in, heard the fridge open, the rustle of plastic bags, Lena's low voice saying something about being behind schedule. Then, soft footsteps, carpet creaking, her door opening a sliver. Margaret closed her eyes and kept her breathing steady. David stepped in. The beep of the digital blood pressure cuff broke the silence. Cool plastic wrapped around her forearm. His fingers worked quickly, quietly, like he'd done it a dozen times before. She felt the pressure tighten. He watched the screen. Margaret didn't move. She just listened. The next morning, Margaret sat cross-legged in her recliner. A silk robe wrapped around her frame like old armor. The blood pressure cuff sat unused on her nightstand. Outside, the rain had paused, but the air inside the house remained dense with moisture and something more unsettling anticipation. She clicked open David's old laptop, which he'd left in the office one careless night when Lena had called him upstairs mid-conversation. The screen glowed pale blue in the dark room. No password reset. Still, David Sloan, 23. She didn't smile. She navigated to the shared financial dashboard, the one they'd set up together when they purchased the house. He'd probably forgotten she still had access. Lines of transactions rolled across the screen like a patient's EKG. Most were routine. Utilities, groceries, the occasional gas station. But in between those darker threads, repeat payments to a vendor labeled Herbal Source Plus, LLC, an unregistered supplement site she cross-checked against known gray market distributors. She clicked deeper. Auto ship every 10 days. Recipient, Margaret Sloan. Billing, David Sloan. Margaret's fingers curled over the mouse. Further down, a charge flagged her. $9.99. Unseen Chat Pro. She Googled it. A messaging app with encrypted features, mostly marketed to discreet professionals and cheaters. Another, $349, Mutual Life Direct Premium. Her eyes narrowed. It was a life insurance policy, newly issued. On her name, the beneficiary? David Sloan. She clicked View PDF. There it was. Her age, her health status, all neatly typed. Recent decline, noted by caretakers. Her teeth pressed together. Print. She printed every receipt, every document, every policy. Slid them into manila folders labeled only with numbers. No names, no triggers. She didn't sleep that night. Not really. Just rested in stillness while the printer hummed in the guest office like a distant insect. She was wide awake when David tapped softly at her door the next morning. "Mom? You sleep okay?" Margaret smiled behind the door. Like a stone. She mailed the first folder to Greer with a single yellow sticky note inside. Document everything. The second went to Tessa's househand delivered, hidden beneath a tray of extra banana bread. The third, she took to a local bank 2 towns over and opened a safety deposit box under the name MS Rainwell. She paid the full year in cash and declined the vault insurance. By the following week, her posture changed subtly. She let her shoulders slump when Lena entered the room. She asked David to repeat himself once or twice. She began misplacing her reading glasses, once leaving them in the freezer next to the frozen peas. "You okay, Mom?" David asked, tone dipped in syrup. "Just tired lately," she murmured. She let the tea steep too long, forgot the names of minor celebrities, missed a phone call on purpose. Lena began showing her more travel packages. "You need rest, Margaret. You deserve it." Margaret smiled and folded the brochure in half. Wouldn't that be something? Then, one afternoon while David showered and his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, Margaret moved fast. She slipped it from the charger, thumbed past the lock screen he hadn't changed the code and opened his message app. Most texts were mundane, grocery reminders, stock updates, but one thread caught her breath. Lena. So? David. Vitals still stable. BP's low but steady. Lena. Any day now. Margaret stared at the screen. Her thumb hovered just above the reply button. Then, without flinching, she pressed power and put the phone exactly where it was. Her hands were steady as she opened her spreadsheet that evening. She labeled a new entry. Phase 2, initiated. They wanted her still, so she went quiet but not blind. Margaret let the slowness settle into her bones like fog. She dragged her steps in the hallway, paused mid-sentence during conversation, and tilted her head as if trying to grasp simple things. When she forgot the day of the week, David offered her a smile that didn't quite mask the calculation in his eyes. "You've just been tired lately," he said one morning, gently guiding her toward the recliner. "Naps help. Keep your strength up." He muted her television before leaving the room. "Too much noise isn't good for the brain," he added. "Let your mind breathe." Margaret nodded, soft-eyed and docile. "Of course, sweetheart." She waited until the door closed, then clicked the screen back on. Volume low, closed captions on. By late afternoon, the rain returned, steady and gray. From her chair, Margaret could hear the clinking of wine glasses and the hum of voices in the kitchen. Lena's friends again, 3 of them this time, all with clipped voices and pointed shoes, speaking in the language of people who assumed privacy where there was none. "The skylights really open the space up," one of them said. "And no stairs," added another. "That's a major selling point." Lena's voice floated above them, cheerful and polished. "We're finally going to travel. Real travel. Not just visiting his mother." A pause, a dry laugh, the distinct sound of someone popping open another bottle of wine. Margaret sat very still, the kind of still that predators mistake for weakness. That evening, when the house was quiet again and the dishwasher hummed behind the kitchen wall, she opened the drawer in her suite and retrieved the box that had arrived 2 days pre-Orno return address. Inside, a prepaid burner phone, still sealed in its packaging. She activated it using the instructions Greer had sent, assigned it a name no one would recognize, Eleanor M. She placed it beneath her pillow each night, used it only with the door locked. Her first recording was short, her voice hushed. "The 13th of April, 9:42 p.m. David adjusted my pills this morning. I saw him empty a fresh capsule into tea when he thought I was dozing. Didn't drink it. Stored the cup. Lena hosted 3 women today. One complimented the open concept. I pretended to forget her name." She backed up the file to a hidden cloud account Greer had configured and synced her spreadsheet. Everything in 2 places now, the analog and the digital. One written in her own hand, the other time-stamped and undeniable. Each night brought new entries. "The 14th of April. David asked if I'd eaten breakfast twice. My delay in answering made him smile. The 15th of April. Lena left a real estate folder in plain sight. Asking price already penciled in. The 16th of April. Didn't touch my tea. Poured it into the ivy planter. The leaves turned yellow." David became more attentive as her energy faded. He offered her socks, brought her cut fruit she didn't ask for. She watched him, watching her taking in her breath patterns, her appetite, her sleep. At one point, he lingered in her doorway too long after she'd settled in bed. She pretended to snore rhythmically. She could feel the stillness of him just beyond the frame, waiting for something, listening for proof. He closed the door quietly. Margaret rolled over and stared at the ceiling. That night, before logging off her backup drive, her burner phone buzzed. One message. Unknown number. Greer. "Is your bag packed?" Margaret stared at the screen. Her breath caught in her throat. She rose from bed without a sound and opened the closet. At the back, behind her late husband's flannel shirts and the suitcase she hadn't touched since the funeral, was a leather overnight, bag zipped, ready. She ran her fingers along the handle. Not yet, but soon. They thought they were planning a goodbye. She beat them to it. At 4:17 a.m., the house was soundless sealed in that eerie silence that only comes just before dawn, when even the refrigerator hums seem to hold their breath. Rain whispered against the windows in hushed sheets, and the kitchen lights stayed off, casting the whole house in ghosted outlines. Margaret moved like smoke through the hallway, slippers soft on the hardwood, overnight bag in hand. The same one she'd hidden behind Lyle's old flannels, now packed with exactly what she needed and nothing she didn't. ID, burner phone, a few printed documents, and the envelope from Greer marked in small, firm handwriting, execute upon exit. She didn't glance at the photos in the hallway, didn't check for noise, just reached the door, unlocked it with the key she'd palmed hours earlier, and stepped out into the cool Oregon dark. The sky was heavy with mist, the kind that blurred the world into something mercifully soft. She didn't look back. The cab arrived on time paid in cash. No name, no questions. The driver wore headphones and never spoke. By 5:12 a.m., Margaret was checked into a roadside hotel, 2 towns over under a friend's maiden name. The room smelled faintly of bleach and lemon air freshener, and the sheets were stiff from over-laundering. She sat on the edge of the bed and texted one word to Greer. Clear? 10 minutes later, Greer replied with a short confirmation and a scanned copy of the revocation of cohabitation consent. It had been filed as of 8 a.m., time-stamped, certified, and immediately sent to the estate's holding account. The clause was now active. David's inheritance gone. His shortcut to everything voided. Margaret stared at the document, then filed it into the encrypted cloud with the rest of her backup logs. The second text came from Dot, a long, retired social worker who now helped Greer facilitate elder care protections. The message was as sharp as Dot's reputation. POA has been executed. You're no longer your son's legal dependent. All access revoked. A warmth bloomed low in Margaret's chest satisfaction, not relief. She didn't allow herself the indulgence of peace yet. That would come later, if ever. She ordered black coffee from the lobby kiosk and sat by the second-story window, watched traffic roll by, watched the morning build like a tide, watched herself disappear. At 9:26 a.m., her burner phone lit up. David. David. Where are you? You're scaring us. David. Can you just call me, please? She read the messages twice, noted the shift in tone. Scaring us. Not worried. Please, with a question mark instead of a period. Guilt disguised as concern. Control wearing the mask of love. She deleted the thread without replying. Outside, the light was full now. Margaret peeled the hotel room curtain halfway open and saw nothing remarkable. Just a row of mid-sized sedans, a woman in a red coat walking a Pomeranian, a boy on a scooter. Life. Moving on. At noon, she checked her email. One alert stood out, pushed from her social media account, one she hadn't posted on in nearly a year. Lena Sloan has posted a new update. Sometimes, grief doesn't come with closure. Please keep our family in your prayers. No names, no specifics, but just vague enough to say everything without saying anything at all. Margaret stared at the screen, her lips tight. So this was the next act. A mourning performance with no body, no death certificate, just a hollow show of sadness for an audience that had no idea the curtain had already been pulled. She powered down the phone, poured another cup of coffee, and waited. They faked concern. She filed facts. At 6:43 a.m., Margaret walked to the corner mailbox outside her motel and dropped in a thick manila envelope sealed tight. No return address. Inside, 3 labeled USB drives, a half-dozen scanned documents, test results from Dr. Randall Green, and a neatly typed cover letter. It was addressed to Detective Karen Mullins, Elder Crimes Unit, Multnomah County Sheriff's Office. The cover letter began, I am alive. I am in control of my faculties. What I am not is safe under my son's care. The silence that followed felt like the breath before a storm. Margaret didn't call. She didn't show up in person. She let the facts speak. The audio recordings were dated, clean, and damning David's offhand jokes about cash-out time, Lena's casual dismissal of Margaret's awareness, and worst of all, the clink of capsules being emptied into drinks, followed by faint stirring sounds. Dr. Green's lab results confirmed the presence of methoxychloroquine, a black market stimulant known to induce liver strain and cognitive fog in elderly patients. It wasn't fatal in small doses, but long-term use would have done exactly what Margaret was meant to fear: slow decline, hospitalization, then stillness. The video from the kitchen camera, stitched carefully from motion-triggered clips, showed everything. David spooning white powder into tea, Lena slipping pills into a smoothie. A timeline, a method, a rhythm of malice masked as care. Greer made her move next. The insurance fraud division received a full briefing, forged health statements in the life insurance application, falsified doctor notes in digital forms, and ongoing purchases from banned supplement vendors. Margaret had receipts. Greer made sure every one of them went to the right inbox, including a duplicate set for the Oregon Department of Justice. Tess did the rest. On the 21st of April, she contacted the tip line with a recorded message. My neighbor's family claimed she was slipping, but she seemed sharp. Now she's gone, and they say nothing's wrong. I've seen the wife pour things into her drinks, and just yesterday, she dumped what looked like prescription bottles into my garbage bin while I was raking leaves. Detectives canvassed the neighborhood quietly. They didn't alert David or Lena. Not yet. Instead, they requested trash pickup from Tess's home. What they found inside the bag half-crushed bottles, unmarked packets identical to the ones Margaret had recorded, triggered a formal inquiry. That same week, David submitted early access paperwork to the estate's executor, citing unforeseen medical complications and Margaret's inability to manage personal affairs. It triggered a routine flag. Margaret's revocation form had already updated the cohabitation status in the system. The request bounced back. Alert level, high. David called the bank twice that day. Then Greer's office. No one answered. When David got home that evening, Margaret's room was still empty, the thermostat untouched. The air inside the suite had gone stale, like it had been waiting too long. Lena was pacing the kitchen. Have you heard anything? No, he snapped. She's not answering. Her phone's probably dead. She doesn't just disappear, David. What if... She's fine, he said, louder than he meant to. She's not dead. Lena stared at him, then looked down at her own phone, opened Instagram, scrolled. I can't just do nothing, she muttered. Then, with a dramatic pause, she typed something out and hit post. Margaret saw it from the motel lobby's communal computer. Lena Sloan, at Lena Living Light. Grief doesn't always arrive with a body. Prayers appreciated during this difficult time. Margaret leaned back in the vinyl chair, expression flat. The next morning, 2 unmarked cars rolled past David's house. Then a black sedan stopped one driveway away. 2 plainclothes officers walked up, rang the bell. Lena answered, visibly startled. Mrs. Sloan? We're following up on a concern filed with the Department of Human Services. David appeared behind her, frozen mid-step. The officers smiled politely. Is Margaret Sloan available to speak? Lena opened her mouth, closed it. David's eyes narrowed. She's not here. She left. Where did she go? The officer asked. We don't know, Lena said, voice cracking in a way that wasn't rehearsed. Later that afternoon, Margaret's burner phone buzzed with a new message from Detective Mullins. We've reviewed your materials. We're requesting your formal statement soon as you're ready. Margaret looked at the screen, then up at the window. Outside, the motel sign flickered under a gray sky. She stood up. They told friends she was confused. She gave the truth to people who mattered. David's voice was low, almost reverent, when he made the first call. She's been slipping for months, he told his former coworker. We tried to help, but she just wouldn't let us. Lena's social feed became a curated stage of half-truths and soft-lit sorrow. Old photos of Margaret in the garden. A caption that read, watching someone you love fade is the cruelest kind of grief. They played the long-suffering caregivers, spinning tales for anyone who'd listen. A neighbor, a real estate agent, the woman at the juice bar. She left a note once, Lena whispered to a friend over coffee. It was mostly gibberish, something about clocks and poison. We think it was dementia. But while they curated their grief, Margaret had already given Greer the go-ahead to pull the handbrake. It began quietly. The real estate agent, a bubbly woman with a laminated binder and a Lexus parked outside, arrived at the house one morning for what she thought was a simple staging consultation. She was met by a legal courier, standing on the walkway with a folder in hand. Cease and desist, the man said, handing over the document. Filed under joint tenancy law. One co-owner has revoked sale consent. David erupted when he read it. She's not even here. She doesn't get to pull the strings from a hotel room. She does, Greer said, when he finally got her on the phone. And she has. The house cannot be listed or sold. Not without her. David slammed the phone down so hard the receiver cracked. Lena tried calling the agent back to reschedule. The agent didn't answer. A week later, the Lakewood Gazette ran a quiet, unsigned blurb on page 3. Sources confirm an ongoing elder abuse investigation linked to a high-value estate dispute in the Sycamore Ridge area. Officials declined to name individuals but confirmed sealed filings and financial records are under review. The Gazette was small, but read by everyone in their neatly curated cul-de-sac. Margaret refused interviews. Even when the local CBS affiliate reached out twice, she let Greer handle the silence. Truth didn't need a headline. Not yet. Instead, she focused on watching the performance unravel. David, desperate to regain control, filed a countersuit claiming Margaret had become mentally unfit and had been manipulated into abandoning the home. He listed a handful of vague symptoms: confusion, paranoia, poor hygiene. He submitted an affidavit from Lena as proof. The judge barely glanced at it. What Greer submitted instead was a collection of time-stamped recordings, lab-certified toxicology reports, notarized documentation of the revocation clause, and a sworn affidavit from Dr. Green affirming Margaret's mental clarity. She also included Tess's signed witness statement, which read, in part, "If Margaret Sloane is confused, I must be hallucinating. She's sharper than anyone else on this street." The suit was thrown out within 2 days. David never looked more like his father than when he lost. Red-cheeked, lips twitching, fists jammed in his jacket pockets as reporters snapped photos of him leaving the courthouse with Lena 2 steps behind, jaw tight as glass. Back home, the mood shifted. Blinds stayed drawn. David stopped mowing the lawn. The for sale sign vanished overnight. Lena scrolled obsessively. Updates, whispers, hashtags. She began reading every comment under her own posts, deleting anything that hinted at questions. But the algorithm had already turned. Then, one morning, while sipping lukewarm coffee at the kitchen island, Lena opened the mail. A single envelope. No return address. Inside, a legal summons. Her hands trembled. Grand jury subpoena, State of Oregon, Elder Exploitation Division. She dropped it onto the counter like it burned her. David walked in. "What is it?" Lena didn't speak, just turned the envelope toward him. He paled. They needed her gone. She needed them exposed. The morning after Lena opened the grand jury summons, David received an email from HR. Administrative leave pending ethics review. The wording was cold, surgical typical of the engineering firm he'd worked at for 11 years. Attached to the message were screenshots from an anonymous tip. Questionable financial transactions linked to elder guardianship, flagged insurance claims, and a forwarded clip from a local broadcast where a blurred figure alleged systematic poisoning. He didn't bother replying. By 2 p.m., his employee ID had been deactivated. Access to the company server revoked, his name removed from the project email tree. Lena fared no better. A slow trickle began in her DMs, subtle at first, but unmistakable. "Didn't you post something about your mother-in-law just last week?" Weird how that sympathy post vanished. "Do you always monetize family tragedy?" By the end of the week, 3 of her paid partnerships severed ties. "We appreciate your past work," one rep wrote, "but in light of recent developments, our values no longer align." A 4th didn't even offer that Courtesy just removed her name from their press list and archived every branded post she'd ever done. Her follower count bled out by the hundreds each day. She tried pivoting home design content, a heartfelt apology reel, wellness resets, but it was too late. The audience had moved on. The algorithm had spoken. Their home, once pristine, began to rot from the inside out. Mail piled up. The lawn went brown. Their bedsheets stayed crumpled, unused. David paced the upstairs hallway most nights, barefoot and wired, reading legal articles on guardianship fraud until the blue light made his eyes burn. Lena stayed on the couch, wrapped in the same blanket for 3 days straight, scrolling until her thumb went numb. Neither of them mentioned Margaret aloud anymore. Not in words, only in looks. And Margaret? She'd already moved on. Her new address wasn't on any form, not on any utility bill. It was a quiet cottage, nestled at the edge of a wooded property run by a non-profit elder advocacy program, fully private, legally shielded. The air smelled of fir needles and pine mulch. Her windows looked out on moss-covered stones and a single hummingbird feeder. A black and white spaniel named Iris rested at her feet most afternoons while she read. She went by Meg Rainwell now. Nobody asked questions. Nobody blinked twice. Greer came by once a week, with a sealed briefcase and a printout of the latest estate audit. "Every account is frozen," she said that morning, pouring tea from Margaret's kettle. "David tried transferring some assets denied. Lena attempted to access your health portal. Flagged. There's nothing left for them to reach. The house will remain in limbo until probate settles, or until it's forfeited." Margaret stirred honey into her tea, watched the swirl of gold dissolve. "And the trust? Locked and funded. Only your new power of attorney can access it now." Margaret exhaled slowly. "Good." Greer studied her for a moment. "You look lighter." Margaret didn't smile. "I'm not. I'm just ready." Greer set her cup down. "Ready for what?" Margaret looked out the window. The rain had returned, soft and steady. "Now, burn the bridge." 2 days later, the sirens came at dawn. David was shaving when the pounding hit the front door. Lena screamed. A second knock followed, heavier, colder, final. "Police! Search warrant!" David opened the door to 3 officers in plain clothes and 1 uniformed tech with a duffel bag. In 30 minutes, every drawer was emptied. 2 laptops bagged, phones collected. The unmarked vitamin bottles still hidden in the spice cabinet tagged and boxed. Lena sobbed on the staircase. David stood frozen in the hallway, watching his world dismantle. And somewhere, just past the trees, Margaret brewed tea and waited. He asked how she slept at night. She said, "With my door locked and yours open." Margaret sat in the narrow witness chair, spine straight, a cream-colored cardigan buttoned all the way to her throat. A carafe of water sat within reach, untouched. The hearing room smelled faintly of old carpet and legal tension, like every courtroom she'd ever walked past but never thought she'd enter as anything other than a spectator. The tape recorder on the table was already running. Her voice would be entered into the record, transcribed, archived, preserved like a fossil. The assistant DA leaned forward. "Mrs. Sloane, are you ready to begin?" Margaret folded her hands in her lap. "I've been ready." They started with a deposition, a calm voice reading back Margaret's own words, line by line. She didn't flinch once, even when they played the audio file. "It's almost time to cash out." David's voice filled the courtroom, not loud, but clear, crystal clear. Leaning casually into the mic of his iPad, chuckling to Lena. "She's still taking them, right?" Lena. "Don't overthink it." David again. "Every morning." Then came the line again, unchanged. "It's almost time to cash out." A low gasp stirred through the jury box. One woman put her hand to her mouth. A man leaned back in his seat like someone had struck him. David's attorney called it a bad joke, taken out of context. A private conversation not meant to be overheard. "But it was," Margaret said into the microphone. "And I did hear it. Then I documented everything that came after." They brought out the spreadsheet next, labeled columns, dates, dosage, recorded mood, clarity, side effects, photographs of pills, test slides, scans of her own handwritten notes. The jurors flipped through copies in silence, the sound of paper shuffling like dry leaves. When Lena took the stand, she wore a soft gray suit and a forced stillness. Her lawyer coached her, but the pressure broke through anyway. "Did you crush pills into Mrs. Sloane's tea?" "Number. Did you ever research how long it would take for cognitive decline to present in an elderly woman?" "2 looked up supplements. That's all." "But you told a friend it was finally happening, correct?" Lena hesitated. It was a bad choice of words. The prosecutor played the voicemail again, the one Tess had intercepted. Lena's voice. "Any day now?" This time, Lena visibly shook. Her heel tapped against the floor, a staccato of unraveling nerves. David tried a different approach. He portrayed himself as a concerned son, overwhelmed by caretaking. "She was forgetting things. We were trying to help." But the insurance paperwork told a different story. "So why did you take out a policy on her life 2 months after she moved in?" David's mouth opened, then closed. It was just a precaution. Margaret said nothing while he fumbled. When it was her turn again, she kept it brief. "I wasn't confused," she said softly. "I was cautious. I watched the people closest to me plan my exit like a real estate transaction. I gave them rope, and they hung themselves with it. David looked at her for the first time in hours. "You think you're so clever?" he muttered under his breath. She met his eyes and answered without hesitation, "I think I'm alive." After 3 hours of cross-examination, the judge adjourned for lunch. The assistant DA leaned toward Margaret as the room emptied. "We're filing elder exploitation and attempted fraud. The grand jury's ready." Margaret nodded once, then reached for the water and took a long, steady sip. They gambled on her death. She lived and sentenced their freedom. David sat stiffly in the courtroom, jaw clenched, tie crooked. His lawyer whispered urgently in his ear as the judge prepared to read the final terms. Margaret, seated 2 rows back, didn't blink. She wore navy today, her hands folded over a notebook she hadn't opened since the start of the hearing. Her presence was the sentence. The rest was just punctuation. The plea deal had come after months of negotiation. With the recordings, the insurance fraud, the pill analysis, and Lena's crumbling deposition, David had little room to maneuver. He could either take the offer or risk prison. 18 months probation, the judge said, his voice low and deliberate. A $50,000 fine, mandatory financial ethics counseling, no contact with the victim, no access to her estate, ever. David didn't react at first. Then came a single nod, tight and bitter, like it had lodged in his throat. As the gavel fell, Margaret leaned slightly forward. "It's almost time to cash out," she whispered, just loud enough for him to hear. David turned in his seat, but the bailiff was already ushering him toward the side exit. He didn't look back again. Lena wasn't so lucky. Her charges pending trial included obstruction, tampering with medical intent, and insurance fraud. Her lawyer tried to separate her from David's case, painting her as misled and emotionally manipulated. But screenshots don't lie. The messages, the deposits, the post-deletion metadata. The state wanted a full trial. Lena cried in the hallway afterward, makeup streaked, breath hiccuping into silence. Margaret passed her on the way to the elevator, pausing only to glance down. "You could have just asked me to leave," she said. Lena didn't respond, just buried her face in her hands. The civil suit came next. Margaret, through Greer, filed a claim for emotional distress, elder abuse, and attempted financial exploitation. She won decisively. The damages were substantial, enough to buy a new house, live comfortably, even travel. Instead, Margaret signed the check directly over to a nonprofit she'd quietly partnered with a coalition for elder protection and legal education. "I didn't survive to sit on it," she told Greer when they met in her cottage kitchen. "I survived to keep someone else from falling through the same crack." Greer nodded, setting down the paperwork. "They want to use your name in the advocacy campaign. Call it the Sloan Clause. Make it a model for estate protection." Margaret didn't smile. "Only if it scares them." "It will." David left Oregon that fall. No forwarding address, no farewell. His social accounts were deactivated. The company he'd once called family cut all ties. Word was he moved to Arizona. Or maybe Montana. No one seemed to know or care. The house sat empty for months. Grass gone wild. Windows filmed over. Real estate agents wouldn't touch it, not without full title release. And that still had Margaret's name on it. Which is why, one overcast afternoon, Greer returned with a folder in hand and her usual dry efficiency. "You're the only one left on the deed now," she said, flipping it open. "It's yours, clean." Margaret stirred her tea. Earl Grey. No sugar. Greer continued. "You could list it, rent it, burn it to the ground. Entirely your call." Margaret looked past her, toward the window. A robin darted from one branch to another in the trees outside, tail feathers twitching. "I don't want their walls," she said. "Just the silence they left behind." Greer closed the folder. "Then I'll take care of it." But as she reached for her briefcase, she paused. "One last question," she said. "Do you want your half of the house back?" Margaret didn't answer immediately. She stared at the steam curling from her mug, then at the empty chair across from her. Once, that chair had held a son she'd thought she knew. Now, it held nothing at all. She left under suspicion. She returned with peace. Margaret's return to Lakewood wasn't dramatic. No headlines, no arrival party, just a late afternoon bus pulling into the depot, a canvas tote on her shoulder and a paperback folded open in her lap. No one looked twice at the older woman stepping off into the breeze of a sleepy Oregon spring. That was the point. She wore her hair shorter, now chin-length, soft silver waves tucked behind her ears, glasses with a matte black frame. No makeup, just clean lines, a quiet coat, and a slow walk that blended perfectly into the rhythm of small-town life. Her cottage was new, tucked farther from the cul-de-sac this time, nestled along a tree-lined bend near the edge of a wetland reserve. Pale green siding, a wraparound porch, and a garden bed already laced with lavender and thyme. The property belonged to the nonprofit she'd funded quietly after the trial. They offered transitional housing for older adults escaping coercive care. Margaret was its first anonymous resident. The name on the mailbox was Rainwell. She smiled every time she saw it. By the second week, she joined the local library's monthly mystery book club under that name. Nothing big, just 6 women, an urn of weak coffee, and dog-eared paperbacks. She listened more than she spoke, until one night someone mentioned a case, local, recent, involving some influencer wife and her poor mother-in-law. Margaret sipped her tea, nodded once, and said nothing. The group moved on. No one recognized her. But Tess did. It happened outside the co-op, next to the heirloom tomato display. Tess looked up from her shopping cart and went completely still. Then, without a word, she stepped forward and pulled Margaret into a tight, trembling hug. "You did it," Tess whispered, her voice cracking. Margaret held her a moment longer than necessary. "No," she said gently. "We did." Tess smiled through tears. "They said you were confused. You were the clearest one in the room." Margaret began working with Greer and Dot, remotely reviewing documents, consulting on new language for estate protections, helping them create a downloadable toolkit for seniors. How to recognize subtle signs of exploitation, how to legally separate from toxic caregivers, how to leave without being followed. She worked from her kitchen table, usually with a mug of rosemary tea at her side and Iris, her black and white spaniel, curled at the window. The pup had taken to guarding the porch, as though it were sacred ground. Birds chirped. Mail came. Rain fell in clean, soft sheets across her windows. Peace wasn't loud. It was earned in quiet. Her herb garden thrived oregano, sage, mint, and chamomile tangled in gentle harmony. The hands that had once shaken under pressure now pressed seeds into earth with steady precision. She didn't need to look over her shoulder anymore. No one came. Until the letter arrived. It was tucked among her usual mail. Utility notice, book club reminder, a seed catalog. But this envelope was different thick, aged stock. No return address, just her name, handwritten in a script she hadn't seen in years. Margaret froze, the air suddenly colder. She brought it inside, placed it unopened on the table. Iris barked softly once, then lay back down. Margaret stared at the envelope. It smelled faintly of old paper and cedarwood. The ink was clean, deliberate. She didn't touch it. Not yet, because some letters didn't come for answers. They came to open a door you'd sealed for good. It came in a box, just one packet, and a note. "Sorry." Margaret opened the package slowly, the afternoon sun casting long, slanted shadows across the table. Her hands were steady, her breath shallow but even. The box had no label, no postage. Just a discreet hand delivery mark from a courier service she hadn't used since Lyle's funeral. Inside, a single pale green vitamin pack identical to the ones David had once laid beside her toast, and a folded slip of paper. She didn't touch the packet right away, just stared at it, the way you might study a venomous snake in a glass tank, still dangerous, still real. The note was handwritten, tight cursive. "Sorry, I didn't know how far it had gone. I thought we were fixing things, not destroying them. You were always smarter than me, Dee." No signature. No apology that meant anything. She held the note up to the light. No watermark. No tricks. Then, slowly, she picked up the packet, the same nondescript foil, same cheerful branding. Clarity Plus Senior Wellness Complex. This time, though, it wasn't laced with false hope or hidden threat. It was empty. Sealed, but hollow. No pills, no powder, just air. Margaret smiled, not out of amusement, but recognition. This was his peace offering, a symbol, a final move from a man who had run out of hands to play. He wanted closure, but closure wasn't hers to give. She stood, packet still in hand, and crossed to the fireplace. The morning's fire had died down to low amber flickers, but the coals were still hot. She didn't hesitate. With 2 fingers, she dropped the packet and note into the flames. The foil curled first, then blackened. The paper hissed before vanishing in a breath of smoke. It smelled faintly of burnt citrus and something chemical, even still. She turned away. The kettle on the stove whistled just as she stepped back into the kitchen. She pulled it off the heat, the steam rising in gentle curls. Her herb jars lined the shelf in neat rows, labeled in her own pen. Rosemary, lemon balm, thyme, sage, mint. She scooped a mix of lavender and lemon verbena into the strainer, letting it steep. This brew was hers. No additives. No hands but her own. She carried the mug to her desk, where her laptop sat open beside an old leather-bound journal. The cursor blinked at the bottom of a draft titled, Unattended. She had spent the past few months outlining the story, not just her escape, but her resistance. Her survival without spectacle. The paper trail. The silence. The calculations between sips of poisoned tea. She scrolled to the final paragraph and placed her fingers gently on the keyboard. They thought silence meant surrender. They mistook grace for weakness, but I didn't survive to prove them wrong. I survived to show myself I could. She paused, sipped the tea, then typed the final line. Survival wasn't the revenge. The silence was. She read it again. Not with satisfaction, but certainty. Then she closed the laptop, reached for her pen and carefully folded the final page of her handwritten draft, tucking it into an envelope addressed to Greer, to be opened only if necessary. She placed it atop her desk, beside a photo of Lyle holding a trout by the river, squinting into the Oregon sun. He'd always trusted her compass, even when others tried to redraw her maps. Outside, the wind picked up, sweeping through the lavender rows and rattling the windows softly. Iris, curled in her usual spot beneath the sill, let out a deep, contented sigh. Margaret stood, stretched, and walked to the window. She looked out at the garden, at the storm clouds rolling in with quiet promise. Then she turned back to the room and never looked back.